So we'll start this with a new workflow. Trying to keep it a little bit simpler than the previous one, and so we will drag and drop some things in from other workflows so that they're a little bit easier to start with. In this case, what we want to do is create some adoption and sales records for different puppies. So we have our puppy table. Again, this is coming in from an Alteryx DB, making it simpler to do this processing. Fields come in as we expected, so they look good. So what we want to do is sell some of our puppies and not all of our puppies. So we have a number of options available to us to actually choose some records out. One very easy one that I've seen is right here. It is the random % sample. And what I want to do is sell 25 to 20% of my puppies. That gives me about 400. So all I do is say randomly select 20% of these guys. When we run this, we can see that we have some of the puppies that have been selected to be sold and or adopted. And there are 400 of them. It does a good job, and I'd be happy with that. But I thought I would show you a couple more of these, just as you're looking at data and how to deal with your data, putting some testing together, or some of the other processes that you might running into in the future. So this will always give us 400. So another way that we can get, again, 20% randomly, but not necessarily exactly 400. So we'll choose the 1 in every n rows, or basically 1 in n chances. So all we want to do is say 5, so I want a 1 in 5 chance for a record to be picked, which means that, again, we'll get approximately 400 in this case. We also could do this within grouping so that we get a random sample from each representative group of data, but while we're not concerned of that, we'll go ahead and just put that in here. And so then again, you see we have some random records chosen, and there's 389 because that's randomly was selected. If we run this again, you'll get a different set of records and a different total number. We'll see that in a moment. And then finally, the select records. Select records is useful in a number of different circumstances. I'm not so sure that it's randomly choosing them, but since this data was picked randomly, I can just say I want the first 400 records. So I want records from 1 to 400. And since these puppies were more or less created randomly as well, it'll give us a random set of puppies across the breed and kennel name for our process. Real quickly, we'll come down here into this random percentage, and we see we now have 410 records. Any 3 of these could do the job for you depending upon what your needs are, and it's a way to slice your data for different purposes going forward. We'll leave those sit there as a reminder, but we're going to work off of this number here, which is a strict 400 records chosen randomly from within our data set. So what we need to do is decide which puppies to choose to be adopted and which puppies not to be chosen. We could again put this random percentage in here, or just choose the first range of them, or one of these other choices, but I thought I would show you a little bit about the random number generator that Alteryx has built into the formula widget. So a lot of things you can do with the formula widget. You can modify data. You can create data. I want to go ahead and pull in what I've already generated because it's very simple. I want to go ahead and randomly choose which puppies to sell and which ones to adopt. So we have inside of the formula a function called randInteger, which will generate a random integer from 0 to 4. That will give us 5 different numbers. As you can see here, when we run this, sold flag has 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 0s. So we want to just simply adopt some of these. And what we will do is choose the puppies by the random number generated that we've created. So I do that from a filter, so I can split my two streams. One stream will be adopted, the other stream will be sold. And I can choose which of these numbers I want to use by a simple filter. In this case, I just want to go and choose all the zeros. Run this, and on the true side, we have 87 adopted, or potentially we're going to make the adopted stream, and 313 that will be part of the sold stream. That being said, then we want to create some attributes associated with those streams independently. We'll use the formula for those as well. So what I will do is take the true side into an adoption process and the false side into the sold process. In the adopted process, we want to choose the grace period or the adoption period for some of the records. And so what we will do is we will choose either 0, 30, or 90 by again using the RND function. For those that are sold, we want to choose a sales amount. And in here, since we don't want an integer, we actually want a numeric field. We will go ahead and just use the rand function, which returns us a number between 0 and 1. Multiply that by 200 and give us a minimum sale price of 75. So we will have anywhere from $75 for a sale or $275 for a sale. We can see how that works out. For within the adopted side of this, we have our 3 adoption periods, either 0, 30, or 60 days. And then we have our sales amounts. We're going to bring these records back together because we will be processing them. So in this case, we'll simply use the union and bring the two halves of this process together. The union allows me to bring in multiple streams, not just 2, so I can bring in anywhere, or basically any number of streams together, and it will simply merge those and giving us the attributes associated with all the sets. A couple of options you have available to you is how to blend these two sets together. And I'm going to configure the columns or the fields depending upon name. So if the name is in both of the data streams, it will be a common attribute. If the names differ from one stream or the other, it will simply become an additional attribute. I can also do it by position to where field 1 equals field 1 in both streams. Or I can manually do a mapping to connect these, which I typically do not do. If it's a complex configuration, then I would recommend that you use the select widget to set the field names and types in order properly before you do the union. A little bit easier that way, and you elicit full control. If there are additional columns in the two streams, you have a choice of what you want to do. You can stop processing at that point. This is useful if you're rerunning a workflow and you're worried about additional column possibly appearing in it, this would give you an error and stop it. You can also just ignore the errors so it doesn't show up in your log, or the default which I use, which is to warn me that there's a difference so I can double check it. If there are different fields, do I just want to output the common set, or do I want all fields to be output? I'll use all fields, and if I need to clean it up, I will do so in the select afterwards. So when I run this, you can see that adoption period is in one stream and sales amount is in another stream, but all this data comes together. For those that were sold, the adoption period is null, and for those that were adopted, the sales amount is null. We'll go ahead and clean up our stream for sales purposes by dropping in a select. Happy with everything that's here, except for I really do not need the birth weight for my sales, and I no longer need my sold flag because that was just simply used to separate records out. So things are looking good. I still need to add more data onto all of this. So one of the things I need to do is decide who to sell it to. I also need to set the sales date. And I'll go ahead and use a formula for that as well. Again, pretty straightforward by this time. For the person flag, this is where we're actually going to have a person that it was sold to as opposed to a kennel. And then we just simply create a random sales date, again using the rand integer, and we're going to add days to the birth date for the date that they was sold or adopted. This sets us up to use a filter. So again, this is one we're going to take and utilize this random number to determine who was sold to a person and who was sold to a kennel. We'll go ahead and simply drag in our filter. And decide that again, we will want to see the person flag equals 0. They were sold to a person, otherwise they were sold or adopted to a kennel. Slide our workflow over. As we're running out of room on the left, we want to continue working where we are. The next step is going to be to go ahead and get a person's name into this. So a couple ways I could have done this, but I decided to bring in a little bit of a data set and do some cleanup of that and introduce a few more widgets. Great place to get just some basic data into your workflow is the text input. In this case, what I did for text input is went to the web. I Googled on most popular names. Website came up that had in it the rank and the name of a man or girl or male, along with the also ranked name for a female or girl. It also had the counts that were associated with them in the United States last year. So the #1 name last year, in case you were wondering, for a boy baby was James, and for a girl baby it was Mary. All I did is I copied that set of data out of the browser and I pasted it with the paste function into this input data widget, or the text input widget, and that gave me the top 50 that I had copied out. This gives me 100 names to work with, but they're not in a very convenient format for me to use. So what I will do here is clean up this data to make it usable as a lookup to assign a person's name to the adoption or sale. I could have put this in a spreadsheet, could have put this in a flat file, but I figured I would just paste it in since it was going to only be used one time, and that was here. and I won't have to worry about maintaining or managing a data file going forward. Let's drop a select on the end of this so we can clean up the data that's coming in. Choose what we want to do. We do not need rank. We do not need the counts. All that we need is the male name and the female name. What we want to do though, once we've done this, take a look at the result, is you'll see that they are two columns in the same record. It'll be easier for us if we have these separated out. And so we can do that with one of transformation widgets. In this case, it has names of these which I can never exactly remember, which is a crosstab and which is a transpose. But Alteryx has done a good job of choosing the icon for this widget. And what I want to do is turn my columns into rows. And the transpose shows me that in the widget icon. I do not have any key columns. I want to create two data columns, one for male name, one for female name. Go ahead and run this. And see, we end up with the male name and a value, female name and a value. So here are the names that I'm going to be assigning to people randomly. Dropping a select on the end of this. I'll be using this data going forward. I do not need the name, but I do need the string. Next, in order to match this up, what I plan on doing is generating a random number to associate with the names. And I'll need to match that random number up to a name within this list. And I sort of fell into this widget one time trying to solve a bit more complex problem and suddenly realized that my problem was very easily solved if Alteryx created a widget. All this widget does is it adds a unique record or unique row ID to each record. I want to call that first name ID. I can give it any name, I give it any starting value, and I can give it a data type. Put it at the beginning or at the end, depending what I see. This is a great way of numbering records coming in or keeping an order of records in case you have to order your records, or creating a unique key if you need to create a unique key for a new set of data. So now when I run this, I find myself having a very nice lookup table. It has an ID and a name. All I need to do is randomly create an ID, and we have 100 names to choose from. So we can again go back to our favorite random number function, put it into a formula, and create a first name ID. Again, the IDs go from 0 or go from 1 to 100, and the random integer starts at 0. So I want to request 99 to get 0 through 99 for my random integer. Add 1 to it so it makes the range from 1 to 100. Once that is done, all I need to do is to join this data together as the lookup. Drop in my two sides to my join them on first name ID. So when I run this, I'll see that everyone gets a name. No one was left out from the data standpoint. If I scan through this first name, you can see that it has indeed giving me a person's name. Here we go, within value. So now also what I need to do is clean this up a little bit. And just to show you how this works, we want to go ahead and we can clean that up. Within the join widget, I no longer need the first name ID for any reason. This left value happens to be purchaser first name. And rather than a string, let's make it sort of right sizing by making this a V string. And give people up to 50 characters to be their name. And we want to move this down. Running this. So from the adoption standpoint, from adoption and a sales standpoint, because the data is together, I now have a purchaser first name for the set of records that I wanted to have randomly assigned a first name. Not very many. We can see some duplicates of names. Don't really like the way that looks, but when I rerun it, it'll look a little bit differently, so we won't have the same name here as frequently as we do. Oh, let's look at this real quick. Yeah, okay. So we want to sort of do the same thing on the other side, and that is to go ahead and assign a kennel name. So basically repeat this process, and I'll do that by cutting and pasting it in. So I will randomly assign a kennel ID. And I'll bring in the kennel table. There are 10 kennel IDs, 1 through 10. So that's why my number here is 9 to 1. And then when I join them together, I'll do some cleanup as well. So I just end up with a kennel name. We can see that all of the records have been assigned a kennel. And then here are the kennel names. A bit more of these, so they showed up a bit more. I do have one minor possible issue, and that is that just through the random generation piece of it, that the kennel name from the puppy actually might equal the purchaser kennel name. And I need to go ahead and get rid of those. And what I will do there is set it to null, which is a valid piece of test data that I want to work with in my reporting. But first, before we do that, let's bring this data together with our union. So we have one set of data. We will choose the join from top flow and the join from the bottom flow to get one complete set of data. As you can see, generating data is a bit more tedious possibly than using data that's there, but it gives you full control over what you're doing with your testing. So let's go ahead and clean up the possible duplicate of the kennel where the kennel is selling it to itself, which is not a good idea. And I'll work on generating this because this is something that you probably will end up doing this kind of structures, and that is a conditional value. What we want to do is change the purchaser kennel name, that if it is equal to the purchaser name, then I want to set it to null, which is a valid test case because null means that we don't know who it was sold to. And that is where we create an if-then-else structure. Welcome to programming. The if says that if a certain condition exists, then we want to give it a value. If that condition is false, then we want to give it a default value, and then we close out that whole condition statement. The condition that we want is going to be if the kennel name is equal to the purchaser name. So up here we have on this left, we have functions, which we don't need. We also have columns. So I can just choose kennel name. If I click in the right place, it would certainly help. So if the kennel name is equal to, the other way I can get the actual name of the column that I want is by typing in the open bracket. It equals the purchaser name. If that is true, then I want to set the value to null, which there's a function for. Happens to be the null function. Otherwise, I wanted to keep its original value. Typing in the open bracket, I can then click on kennel name. So this says that if the kennel name equals the purchaser's kennel name, then I want to set the value to null. Otherwise, I want it to remain its value that it already had in the purchaser kennel name. Run this through. Take a look at the data coming out. Remember that this data was in union order. So I can see that we do have some null purchaser kennel names. That's good because I did want to have that as part of my reporting data. Also want to go ahead and make this a bit shorter. In the comment, choosing that from the price tag or the annotation. Gives me a quick comment in there. Let's go ahead and clean up this data as it comes out a little bit. Because at this point in time, we're pretty much done with the creating of the transactions. I do not need puppy name, breed name, kennel name, or birth date, because all that I have at this point is I want to have the puppy ID, the sales date, do not need the person flag. I was trying to get rid of that. I need the sales amount, puppy ID, sales date, sales amount, the adoption period for those that have it. I need the purchaser first name and the purchaser kennel name. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and use the sort widget. There's a number of reasons why you would want to sort your data. Sometimes you have to get it in just the right order before you use it in some of the advanced widgets. Sometimes it's just nice to see it come out cleanly. To make this more like transactional data, what I want to do is sort this data so it would look the way it would look coming from the transaction system. That means that they will be putting it in sales date order. And if two of them are the same sales date, we'll go ahead and have puppy ID. One of the things about the sort is that it's one of those that has a very verbose annotation. And you can either choose to delete that, type in something else, type in nothing. You can also, at this time, also choose to say, do not show this, by choosing never from the show annotation. So now when I run this, I have some data that is transactional report data. Rather than put this into a file this time, I've already saved it, but I would then, my next step would be to save this as my transaction data so that I can then, that is what was used in the first workflow to join to the puppies to be able to begin to build my reporting data for puppy sales. But in this case, we just go ahead and drop it into a browse so you can look at the data and see we have the puppy ID, the date that they were sold or adopted. The amount is there if it was sold, otherwise it is null because it was adopted. If it was sold, it does not have an adoption period. If it was adopted, it has different adoption periods. Some of the records went to people. Some of the puppies went to people. And some of the puppies went to kennels. In a few instances, we don't know who it went to, because if the purchaser's first name and the kennel name were the same, it said it did null. It was adopted by a kennel, actually. We have a good set of data, sort of happy with the way it looks, and we're going to be using this. Well, we already used it in the previous workflow, and now we're ready to go on to the third step now that we've sort of worked on some of the more exciting widgets, ones that can actually create some data for you and create some fields, doing some randomization and some cleanup. It's a great way to get that test data, make sure your workflow is working properly. You can put out a condition values to see how they work with that as well. So it's a great place to go. So the next one is going to be to generate our report tables to make our reporting easier. This data that we've generated in the previous workflow can be reported directly from your tool, but it's nice not to have to worry about some of the advanced functionalities of doing roll-ups or data cleansing within your reporting tool. It's nice to actually generate a more accurate set or more complete set of data that makes you use the reporting tool to lay out and format your report as opposed to having to deal with cleaning up data going in.